Good afternoon. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 1st, 2019 Lawrence City Commission meeting. We will start this evening with the approval of the agenda. The city.
I would recommend we move F2 to the end of the meeting.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Do you have a motion?
Second?
Got a motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor? Aye. Okay. We'll move on to item B, which would be recognition and proclamations. And we have one this evening for the Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I believe we have, yeah, there we go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, first and foremost, Commissioners. My name is Will Averill. I'm the Director of Communications for the Willow. This is my third year of coming here for the proclamation in October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I'm appreciative that you all take the time to recognize the importance of the issues surrounding it. I'd like to thank the Commission for providing me with the opportunity to let you know a little bit about what the Willow does and about Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. The Willow builds safer communities through shelter, services, and support to survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking. We believe survivors. We empower survivors. We work with and assist survivors in reaching their goals of safety and stability. Last year, we answered over 5,000 client crisis phone calls, provided over 2,000 services, and 6,999 nights of safe rest. Our agency and our community must commit to continuing to break down cycles of violence and abuse through prevention, outreach, legislation, and active pursuit of policy that dismantles systemic inequality and assists the most vulnerable through services that are available, accessible, and inclusive. This year, we have added two new programs. First, the Foster Transition Support Program, which works with youth who are about to age out of foster care programs to create opportunities, networks, access to programs, housing, and career resources in order to avoid falling into cycles of abuse and violence. We also added a transitional housing program. Transitional housing provides an opportunity for survivors who are no longer in immediate crisis, but still in need of assistance and resources to enter into 1 to 2 year leases at affordable rates in a safe location. While in the program, they have access to a case manager to assist in setting goals, getting information and assistance with further things like housing, transportation, educational, and career opportunities. The Willow also continues to make our services more accessible through a move towards a low-barrier model. The low-barrier model replaces a rule-based system with a collaborative structure promoting continual conversation and mutual agreements between advocates and survivors, building a more trusting and engaged relationship. This year, the Willow completed the Risking Connections program, an intense and immersive training in low-barrier trauma-informed care. This has helped our advocates develop a skill set to provide a more welcoming environment for all survivors in which we can facilitate more comprehensive and understanding care. This is who we are and where we are going as we enter Domestic Violence Awareness Month 2019. This year, we are celebrating the healing power of art and raising awareness of the cost of domestic violence to our community through a weekend partnership called Art Heals with the Lawrence Art Center, October 25th and 26th. This two-day event will feature a survivor art exhibition, the screening of a documentary on domestic violence entitled Behind Closed Doors, a series of workshops that are free and open to the public, including writing your story, self-expression through poetry, and a social justice stitching circle, which will take place on Saturday. This weekend will conclude with Speak Out, Sing Out, a community concert on Saturday, October 26th, featuring local musicians, the Free State Chamber Choir, and the Children's Choir. We encourage all of you, commissioners, commissioner candidates, and community members alike to join us for some of these awareness-raising activities. Domestic violence accounts for nearly half of all police calls locally, and domestic violence is a public health threat masquerading as something personal or private. Only by encouraging healing, engaging with difficult discussions surrounding entitlement, power control, and systemic inequality, and taking concrete action at all levels of legislation and enforcement can we enact change. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence. 30 to 50% of trans and non-binary folks will experience domestic violence. 1 domestic violence incident occurs every 23 minutes in Kansas. According to the KBI statistics, in 2017, there were 935 reported DV instances in Lawrence. And that's just the number reported. We believe the number occurring to be much greater. Physical scars may heal. Mental scars last years, even generations. Awareness is vital. Awareness is the first step. For people to get help, they must know that we are here. For people who can help, they must know why they should. The next step is action. Please join us by becoming informed about what you can do to end domestic violence, both personally and as representatives of this city and engaged members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I'll read the proclamation now. Whereas nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner, and 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men, and up to half of gender nonconforming people will be affected by domestic violence in their lifetime. And whereas the city of Lawrence, Kansas places the utmost value upon the health and welfare of everyone in their community and strives to provide a safer and healthier community. And whereas domestic violence includes both verbal, emotional, economic, sexual, and physical abuse, and all forms of abuse carry long-term physical and mental health implications. And whereas the effects of domestic violence reach far beyond its impact on survivors and their abusers, causing disruption in the community, schools, places of work and worship, and neighborhoods. And whereas during October of 2019, the Willow Domestic Violence Center, working in partnership with local agencies, businesses, organizations, and groups, sponsor and promote Domestic Violence Awareness Month to raise community-wide attention about survivors and their children, and to promote the support of shelters and community programs. Now, therefore, I, Lisa Larsen, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2019 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I urge everyone to speak out against domestic and sexual violence, to support survivors of these heinous crimes, and to encourage community leaders to hold offenders accountable, to be proactive in guiding policies and procedures which reduce domestic violence, to make prevention efforts a priority by hosting events, creating policies at school and work, and by supporting and participating in programs designated to reduce and eventually eliminate domestic violence as a societal problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Shift around a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll let them get out the door a little bit. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Do we have any items that commission wants to remove from the consent agenda?
Item C7A.
C7A. I'd like to remove item C5. Any others? Okay, anybody from the public, would you like to have something removed from the consent agenda for further discussion?
Did you say C7A?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So I have C5 and C7A being removed. Do we have a motion for
with the exception of C5A and C7A?
C5 and C7A.
C5 and C7A.
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Soden, a second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Okay, let's start with C5. And this is the mayor's appointments. And I pulled this off. This is not typical for us to do this, but I pulled it off specifically to call out one of my appointees that I'm considering, or I'd like for the commission to consider, and that is Morgan, Orozco. If you could come up for just a second. Morgan is a high school student here in Lawrence. Yeah. And I am wanting to appoint her to the Sustainability Advisory Board. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I wasn't expecting to speak, admittedly, but I will do my best. So I'm Morgan Orozco. I am very interested in politics, specifically local and state politics, and I try to involve myself in those as much as I can. I have a passion for policy on the local and state and federal level, and am really interested in being active in our local government, more so than I have in the past. And yeah, I just am very enthusiastic.
So you're in high school, is that correct?
Yes,
What-
I'm a junior in high school.
Junior at
Bishop Seabury
Bishop
Academy.
Seabury. So Morgan and I met about a month ago, and she was very interested in getting involved in the climate protection plan, as well as what we're doing with sustainability. And so, given the nature of our times, I thought it was really important to bring some young voices into the conversation. And so that at age of 16, I think you're right.
Yep.
I don't know if she's the youngest. Is she the youngest ever appointed? I don't know, but I think it's pretty close. So I'm really excited to have her on our board. And you just understand you're going to have a full voice, just like everybody else on the board.
Thank
So,
you.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do you have a
Public
motion?
comment?
Public comment on this?
Okay.
All right.
I move that we approve the appointments.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Boley, a second by Commissioner Ananda. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you, Morgan. Item C7A. Consider adopting on second and final reading joint ordinance number 9699 to adopt Plan 2040.
So I pulled this, but I don't think that I would be the only one necessarily who is going to pull it. The primary reason that I wanted to pull it was to continue the conversations regarding 2.2 and 3.8. And I'm getting to it in the report. So I wanted to have a conversation about my understanding was that the commission requested that 3.A be consistent with 2.2. And so the changes that we requested were made on 2.2. And I guess that my question for staff would be, what is the intent of 3.8 that is different from 2.2? And why weren't any changes made if there's a perception that it's consistent? I don't know who wants to answer.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott.
Mayor and Commissioners, we studied the video pretty thoroughly on that last meeting, and 2.2 establishes the kind of the framework for annexing in the three different tiers, and 3.8 establishes more fully the expectation that a community benefit will be provided. And in that discussion, there was a fairly direct question about, are we changing 3.8? And the majority was not to change 3.8, but to alter 2.2 for how you see it in your packet tonight. So we think they work together. 2.2 is providing the factors for review of an annexation in Tier 2, and 3.8 is establishing the framework for working with the community benefit requirement.
So I guess for me, as we were discussing this, particularly in light of the fact that, the establishing sentence in 2.2 is the city may, at its discretion, annex Tier 2 land, which is the framework, and up until we added it, the unspoken piece of this plan. So when I look at 2.2 and look at all the considerations that we can make, in addition to clarification around what a community benefit is, which I don't think that we changed, but we clarified. There is a typo under what is a community benefit. The buildings and the road cover the beginning of the word community. That aside. 3.8, particularly the first sentence, I find a little bit convoluted and still requiring of the community benefit, which was my understanding in 2.2. We were making it a factor that could be considered, but not a requirement to include. And so my interpretation around 3.8 is that I would support requiring a community benefit in any request for offsetting incentives, but would allow someone who is applying to annex to choose whether or not they create a community benefit. If we have the requirement of a community benefit and they don't have one that's identified, even in working with staff, my worry is that they will make up a community benefit that wouldn't necessarily be wholly beneficial, and I would rather them have the space in which to be honest to say, there isn't one. And that is a pretty serious consideration, in my opinion, for the commission in making a decision on these requests. And I think everyone up here hopes that we have a commission in place that would put a pretty high priority on applications that include community benefits. But to require that wouldn't necessarily encourage anyone to apply for annexation, which is up to the city commission that is sitting at the time when that comes forward, just like we identified in 2.2. So I've had some conversations about this, and so I have a proposal for the language, for the commission's consideration, and certainly any dialogue around that, which would be annexation requests should include a community benefit identified in consultation with staff based on the needs of the community. Next sentence. To be eligible for consideration of an offsetting incentive, the requester shall include, or must include is my preference, because again, that's legal language that isn't necessary, must include a community benefit identified in consultation with staff based on the needs of the community. So it almost sets two tiers of requirement for an application, or one tier and then one option for inclusion in an annexation request, that I think would be more fitting to what my understanding of 2.2 was. And I think that as we look forward, the conversation is that we can always amend this in the future, and I absolutely agree, and I don't doubt that that will occur, but I would rather have something in place that we can strengthen, because it's unlikely that we would be able to pull back once we begin moving forward in that specific way. So that is what I wanted to bring to the table. And I want to express my appreciation for you all holding off this conversation, because I was not able to be present the last time that this came up, so thank you.
Okay.
Will you reread your proposed language?
Yes. Annexation requests should include a community benefit identified in consultation with staff based on the needs of the community. To be eligible for consideration of an offsetting incentive, the requester must include a community benefit identified in consultation with staff based on the needs of the community. And then the rest of that paragraph would follow.
The only question I have is, I didn't realize this originally included the question of incentives.
That's what the original paragraph says. Annexation requests shall include a community benefit identified in consultation with staff based on the needs of the community, which may include offsetting incentives to the requester, and in the context of what the annexation request can support, which, just standing alone, that sentence is a lot to unpack.
Does So the
Well,
incentives have been in there.
Yeah, Jennifer, that's too big a change for me to support. I mean, I am more comfortable going with the original language than I am with your proposal. So I just want to say that I appreciate, your consideration of this. It just happens that we disagree.
I'm struggling with your first and second sentence. The first sentence says that a community benefit has to exist, but then the second sentence says, to be eligible for incentives, a community benefit has to exist.
So it says should,
That's-
and it's for any annexation request, should include a community benefit. Like, we're placing a priority on folks to identify one, but it's not required.
Okay.
But it is required for an incentive request to the extent that it can be required through this document.
Right.
So the word should would imply that it doesn't have to be. Is that correct?
Correct. But the truth is, it doesn't have to be, right, with this document.
It would have to be to get a staff recommendation.
In order to get a staff recommendation.
Presumably.
I am struggling with the word should, because that pretty much puts the onus back on staff, I guess, I don't know, of needing to, I guess there just wouldn't be necessary to have a community benefit unless they're asking for an incentive. Is that what you're?
Well, I think the reality is that they're not required to have a community benefit, full stop. That they are required to work with staff to identify a community benefit, which means they may or may not have something that falls under this. And if they don't, it's my understanding that they would not receive the staff recommendation. But regardless of that, the city can still, or the commissioners can still grant an annexation request regardless. Or not, even if they do have that identified.
I don't think we have to restate state law in this document. This is a plan. And, I appreciate your concerns, but I just disagree with them. I mean, I'm very comfortable with, this has been through a lot of preparation, and, we've gotten recommendations from the Planning Commission on this, and frankly, I don't think we have to say state law needs to be restated in this document.
So you want to change 2.2 again?
I'm happy with the original language on 2.2. I mean, Tier 2 land shall be annexed when the need to accommodate demand is established and community benefits are provided. I think that's pretty clear. So, we can wordsmith this into oblivion, frankly. We got a recommendation unanimous from the Planning Commission, and I'm fairly comfortable with it.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns about this?
I don't want to hold up conversation, but I keep scrolling through the staff memo that's dated October 1st, and somehow I'm still not seeing incentives mentioned in all the iterations of 2.2.
It's
Am I just missing something?
It's
It's in 3.8.
3.8, it's in
It's in
3.8.
the original document.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's rereading and rereading 2.2.
And that language has been in there since we've received the document.
Okay. Like I said, I don't want to hold up the conversation.
Okay.
I appreciate all of your legal finesse, but when we have these plans that are designed by citizens and they have unanimous kind of recommendations, I mean, I've been a little nervous about changing anything, from the beginning. So, on one hand, I like that you're trying to wordsmith it. On the other hand, I feel like we're somehow getting away from where we want the document to be open and accessible to regular citizens and not legalese. And I feel like we're starting to get into that. And I don't really see the community plan as needing to be so airtight, just because also as a commissioner, for the past 4.5 years, we've kind of dealt with very strange things over the years. But I don't know. You know, I want it to have a community benefit, full stop for me too. But I feel like we have been wordsmithing to, so it's like we're just splitting hairs at this point. You know, the community plan is supposed to be read on a citizen level, and we're like way beyond that, I feel like. So I appreciate it, but I feel like we've kind of deferred it too many times now. Time for action.
Maybe before we get too deep into this, we should get public comment on it. So is there any public comment on this item?
Hi, first of all, I just want to state that I think the city is in over its head with Plan 2040. I think there's too much potential for an affordable housing crisis in the near future. That being said, if the city passes it, I will get behind it. And I'll try to think of ways to help it succeed. However, I fully expect the commission to do the same. Last time we talked about this, I listed a few policies currently in place that the city should look at changing so that Plan 2040 doesn't create an affordable housing crisis. Well, I'm here to do the same again. Plan 2040 calls for an increase in population density, yet there are current policies in place that are a barrier for this goal. What I ask of the city is that if you pass this plan, that in the very near future, tonight if possible, you add re-examining some of the current policies that will hinder population density growth as a future work session or agenda item. The main one I'd like you to start with is City Ordinance number 7323, which limits the number of unrelated individuals living in a house that's zoned as single family. This ordinance was passed in 2002 when Horizon 2020 was in place. I'm guessing one of the arguments used when passing the ordinance was that people didn't want an increase of population density in their neighborhoods, which would completely go against the goals of what Plan 2040 calls for. Plan 2040 calls for an increase in population density. We can achieve that in two ways: building more housing within the city or letting more people live in the buildings we already have. By doing away with Ordinance 7323, we would achieve the latter. So the way I see it, if the commission wants to show that it's serious about making 2040 a true success, it's going to need to address the issues that could be a problem for Plan 2040. But I think this commission just plans to pass this plan, ignore potential problems instead of addressing them now so they don't become problems, and just let future commission deal with the fallout once it becomes a problem. So if you are a commissioner that has concerns about affordable housing issues in the future, then I'm asking that when it comes time to add future agenda items or work sessions, you add doing away with the ordinance that limits how many unrelated people can live in a single-family home, especially if you vote against Plan 2040. By bringing it up for discussion, we can then tell just how committed to population density the commissioners calling for it really are. Thank you.
Other public comment on this item?
Commissioners, good evening.
I just want to point out really quick, this is not working, so I'm going to use a timer on here, so I'll just, like I usually
Okay.
do, let you know that they will not be able
All
to
right.
see their time
All
while I
right.
figure this out.
All right, Mike, your time's already up, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope you appreciated my remarks.
Yes, it was good.
Well, all kidding aside, thank you all commissioners tonight for the opportunity to speak to all of you. I'm going to talk to you in two capacities tonight. One is in my day job as regional president for U.S. Bank, and the other is as my other job as the chair-elect for the Lawrence Chamber. You know, and specifically what I wanted to address today is the need as outlined in the Plan 2040 for new development in annexed land to provide a community benefit.
Mike, real quick, could you state your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Michael Orozco.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It's my belief that the mandate as outlined in section 2.2, could have significant unintended consequences with respect to increasing the long-term cost of housing in Lawrence. And I know that that's something that we're all concerned about, is affordable housing within the city and in the county. You know, Lawrence already has significant geographic limitations on its ability to expand, and this mandate could provide this mandate to provide a community benefit beyond expanding the tax base could create additional artificial barriers to expansion. I just want to remind everyone, the world we live in is changing at an accelerated pace. The change of pace has never been faster, but I will tell you, it's never going to be this slow again. None of us in this room knows what's going to happen to our economy, the local economy, the state economy, or the national economy over the next 5, 10, or 15, or 20 years. What we do know is that we want to give the city of Lawrence the best opportunity to continue to be a great place to live, work, raise a family, start a business, or grow a business. And what we don't want to do is put artificial barriers that constrain our ability to grow. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to address you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Is Morgan your daughter?
Yes. Congratulations.
Yes. Other public comment on this item?
Good evening, Commissioners. Danielle Davey, Governmental Affairs Director with the Lawrence Board of Realtors. I also want to thank Mayor Larsen for deferring this discussion at the last meeting so that the full commission could participate and we could have continue to have the good discussion that we've been having on this. I think the language in 2.2 is moving in the right direction. The one thing that I would add is demand was taken out of 2.2. Commissioner Herbert made some very good points at the last meeting about the lot inventory and the quickly declining number of lots we have in Lawrence versus the demand that we have for housing in Lawrence, and the fact that demand in and of itself and providing or meeting that demand could be a community benefit. And so we would like to see demand returned to 2.2 as one of the considerations. We would also like to see, we appreciate the addition of the strategic plan to the definition of community benefit, but we would still like to see something along the lines of meeting community housing needs, or something that makes clear that that is what will be considered a community benefit. We've got a list of goals and objectives that were set out by the BBC Housing Study, and I'm not sure that the strategic plan specifically pulls those in. So we would like to have something a little more specific in that regard. And then with regard to 3.8, I actually really like Commissioner Ananda's proposal tonight. I hadn't heard it before tonight, but I think that is exactly what we have been talking about in terms of prioritizing a community benefit without requiring it, and certainly requiring it if there's a request for offsetting incentives. So I actually really like it, and I appreciate your legal finessing of that language. The other comment I would make, since we've heard some comments tonight about unanimous recommendations coming through this process, is I would just encourage the commissioners to go back and reread the letters that were submitted by John Gascon and Scott Zaremba, who both served on the steering committee. I think those letters make clear that there was not a consensus on this policy at the steering committee. And watch some of the debates at the Planning Commission. I can't recall all of the concerns the planning commissioners raised off the top of my head, but Rob Sands certainly stands out in my head as one of the planning commissioners that raised serious concerns about this policy and spoke in opposition to it. So even though it has been passed through by vote, I think it's a stretch to say that there's been a unanimous recommendation for this policy throughout the process, and I would encourage you all to consider that as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
I'm going to pass these out. I hope I have enough. At least it's not beautiful work, but I think it's pretty accurate. I think I'm Mark Bueller. I've been working with some people, some realtors. I'm in the insurance business. Been working with some realtors with the help of the Home Builders Association. And this is going to seem to you like, what are you doing now? We've had years of discussion, and what's this all about? Well, this is all about some premises that began the theory of how many lots we have available in Lawrence. And I actually care about this a lot. I've lived here a long time, and when I heard the number, I thought, that's a lot. That's a lot of lots in this town. And so we finally, we got the information from the staff in September. That's this September. That's like a month ago. And we started looking at them. And I'm willing to agree that all the information in the staff information given to us may not be accurate, but there are 763 lots in there, as best we could count. And we believe there's a serious development issue with 264 of them. Now, we have our reasons why we don't think those are necessarily developable lots, and any available lot is arguably developable in the right circumstance. But the 264 lots that we've identified, over half of them are owned by the people that live next door. It's their yard. Now, it's not the legal yard, but it's the yard. Many of them have tennis courts, gardens, encroachments, garages. So that's a lot. That's a third of what we thought were available in this community to build on. And I think it's significant, and I'm not suggesting that you stop the presses, but when you determine that you have so much availability today and then you make predictions on how this is all going to work for tomorrow, I think you ought to be pretty close. And missing it by a couple hundred is a big deal. That could be a year or two of demand. We have the report, and we will give you details of that report if you care. We're not going to give it to you tonight because we want to put the reason for identifying each and every lot in the memo so you can read it and understand it, that we didn't just say it just doesn't work. It's part of somebody's home site. We have some examples to show. I don't think we have enough time for this. But you know, we've identified, there's one home in this community that sits in the middle of 5 lots. And if you went by it and you've seen it, it's a hell of a house.
Thank you, Mark. 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're showing that 4 of those are available.
Good evening. I'm Bobby Flory with the Lawrence Home Builders Association, and I also want to thank you again for the time that you've spent studying this issue, and to let you know that we support Plan 2040 with the exception of Policy 2.2 and 3.8. We don't oppose community benefits. When community benefit agreements are entered into freely with the developer, the city, and community partners. There are many opportunities out there that can be achieved if it's agreed to among all the parties. But not every single annexation is going to provide an opportunity for a community benefit. The factors that might affect that are the size, the location, and the land features of a particular parcel. So to just blanket assume that every single subdivision or annexation is going to have something to give is really not right. We've given you many arguments along with the Planning Commission about why mandating community benefits is not good for Lawrence. Lacks consensus. It increases the cost of housing. It increases developers' risk, which will restrict lot inventory. There's not enough infill lots now. It's unfair to ask a particular group of people to pay for a community amenity that's paid for in general by broader funding mechanisms. Mandates are not collaborative, and this policy is not based on data. Having said that, I don't think what we're doing tonight is wordsmithing. these words are critical. They're fundamental philosophical differences on how we go about developing our city. So I don't see this as splitting hairs or wordsmithing. I think that community benefits can be a good thing, and we can have some fantastic opportunities in our community, but mandating community benefits is only going to serve negative consequences in Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Other public comment on this item? Okay. Bring it back up to the commission.
I wanted to withhold all my comments until we opened up for public comment, and now that we've done that, there's a couple things I want to say about this. Primarily the same stuff I said last time, but I don't know if I just lacked two other people to support me or what, but it does feel like my concerns on this issue have never made it onto paper from my microphone. So I'll say them again, and maybe they'll stick this time. Within the term of the next crop of city commissioners, our residential lot inventory will zero out. This is data that we have talked about, and we have accepted it, with or without, whether you accept Mark Bueller's findings or not. Even operating on the 763 number, we have identified that as a number that will zero out within the term of the next city commissioner's term. To me, to not include lot inventory as a defined benefit under the revised section that talks about what is a community benefit, ignores a basic foundational understanding of supply and demand and the effect that zeroing out will have on housing cost. I mean, it's a basic economic principle that if we zero out, not if, when we zero out on lot inventory, there are going to be significant economic costs that come with housing. We already talk about having incredibly high housing costs. Zeroing out lot availability is going to impact that even far greater than it's being impacted now. If we talk about affordable housing being an issue that we champion, we're passing policy that flies directly in the face of that. And it's a simple fix. What is a community benefit? We have 5 bullet points that identify what a community benefit is. You add a 6th bullet point that identifies a community benefit as providing lot inventory when lot inventory does not meet demand. It's that simple. And at that point, you're not guaranteeing an annexation. What you're saying is when the basic economic principles of supply and demand dictate that we need greater lot inventory, providing greater lot inventory produces community benefit. It's not granting a guaranteed annexation. I think the last time we went back and forth on this, the argument was that I was coming from a place where I thought people should just automatically be annexed, and that's not where I'm coming from. Where I'm saying is if we establish a need for lot inventory, then we're saying there's a need for lot inventory, and thereby when someone produces additional inventory, they're serving a community benefit. So I think that just the simple addition of that 6th bullet point resolves a lot of concerns on both sides of this issue. And that's something that is relatively important to me to see be added.
Okay. I would ask a question. From the August 20, this is the memo that you put together, or staff put together and included in the package about how the language has changed on 2.2. How did the language need to accommodate demand get taken out of 2.2?
That need is identified in the header above that. We don't include that in your memo, but that's already stated as a theme, that need is part of the factors of consideration. And we took need, we took need out because the factors listed are those factors that reflect need. So the land use inventories, the market sector health, the valuation to income ratio, those are the things we look to establish whether there's a need for the annexation.
Was it did any of the commissioners request that get taken out? Because the language that you're just talking about seems to be the same, other than the fact that the need was taken out from the change from August 20th to September 3rd.
Well, the big change was flipping the sentences.
Right.
So we put up front, the city may, at its discretion, that was added, annex Tier 2 land. That was the primary change, I think.
I believe that was taken out because of the and. The thing was, it was thought to be too high a threshold to meet it. They had to show need and a community benefit. And I think what the deal was to try to subsume all that into the community benefit.
Right, and that's actually how I understood. So, that's how I understood it as well. That it was being pulled out of 2.2. But my understanding of it was being pulled out of 2.2 because we were assuming that it was a community benefit, and thereby it should be placed within the section that says what is a community benefit. That it's no longer, as Randy said, that it's too high of a burden to say that the and addition, that's almost an assumed variable, that we have to have a demand for it to create annexation. Well, what I'm arguing goes beyond 2.2 and rolls into 3.8, where we talk about community benefit. That if we have a zeroed out lot inventory, is the creation of lot inventory a community benefit? And I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, but it seems to me like it's relatively obviously a community benefit if you have a zeroed out lot inventory. But we're not demonstrating that with our language. And I don't consider it wordsmithing. I'm with Bobby Flory. I don't think we're wordsmithing a document. I think we're trying to make a document say what we intend it to say. And I don't think it says what we intend it to say at this current time.
I guess, I'm going to disagree because I think it says what I intended to say. I mean, when it says a community benefit may include but is not limited to, I mean, a commission could say that is a community benefit that we're going to care about. I don't think we have to list every benefit that's possible in here for it to be there. And I'm very happy with the language.
Anybody else thought on that?
Well, I do agree that the but not limited to was intended to include those kind of situations. I wouldn't be opposed to adding something like that. I don't think it speaks to the heart of the issue that I wanted to bring to the table, but I do think it's a conversation worth having.
Yeah, I mean, once we get through this document and it moves on, I mean, the work is really just going to begin after this has been approved. And a full comprehensive discussion on what is or is not a community benefit is going to happen at that point. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
I think it'll happen with every annexation.
Yeah.
This was built with the framework of there's a market demand that an annexation can fill, right? That's the need part of it. And then the community benefit is as that demand is being filled, is there other benefit that a property can provide? I just urge you to think about the outcome after 20 years of development. If market rate housing is the community benefit, that's what you'll get, is the same market rate housing. And we need that. Clearly, we need that demand filled.
Yeah.
If we want other benefit like affordable housing and to be determined workforce housing, there's a wide range of things. And if we want sensitive lands protected in park space and that is identified with each annexation, then we really need a policy framework to help us all, because it's everyone in the room, it's planning commission, it's developers, it's staff, and it's ultimately city commission.
But at that point, where we dictate specifically what a development should be, this needs to be workforce housing, I think that's, Jennifer, where your changes come into play, frankly. Where your proposed language would actually address that and say, yes, you can bring in market rate housing because we have, zeroed out a lot inventory, but what we really want you to do is this, and we can offer these incentives based around the additional community benefit. I get that with every annexation, this body or a body resembling this body will really craft and critique what this document is. But that's the exact risk that Bobby Flory's talking about, is that unknown. That who's going to invest large chunks of money when they just have to come before this body and hope that the will of the day is what they're trying to produce. I mean, that's a pretty big gamble to expect somebody to do just by saying, hey, this is a living document. It's going to change with every breath we take, and just let it happen. You don't invest money based on a living document that changes with every breath. That's just a bad idea.
So how much detail do you think is appropriate in this document? I mean, we could go on for days. and
No,
talk about
it takes.
community benefit.
I honestly think it takes one bullet point. I think it literally takes adding the bullet point saying that the absence of inventory is in of itself community benefit. That at the point at which we have a zeroed out inventory, adding inventory provides the community a benefit, and therefore meets the standard set by Plan 2040.
I don't agree with that.
Well, actually, I do agree that zero inventory I would consider that to be something
It's
to
going to happen
consider.
in your term.
It says, but is not limited to.
I know, and
Me,
that's
I
I
don't
guess
think we
where
have to state it.
is it, but it's not limited to, and that's.
But
I
if
mean,
you
how many-
believe it, why not state it?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have agreement on that. I mean, this is, one of those things where we don't necessarily agree. And, as Scott said, if you define that as the benefit, then that's really all you're going to get.
So can I shift a little bit and ask for clarification on exactly what the first sentence of 3.8 as it's written is saying?
From legal?
No, just in, if we're talking about this should be a readable document, that first sentence to me is highly convoluted and should be 2 sentences, but I'm not even sure that I understand it, particularly the last clause, which is, and in the context of what the annexation request can support. It's out of sync with the rest of the sentence. Can anyone kind of
Is
pull
it
that
possible
apart?
for us to put this up so people can see what we're talking about?
Sure,
I'm
Jeff
on
can.
the staff memo. Are you looking at the June 2019
No, I'm
version?
looking at Plan 2040 as it's written now, 3.8.
So this was wordsmithed by committee as well, at the Planning Commission. Didn't start off exactly this way, but remember there's a process involved here with any annexation request. And it typically starts in a conference room in the planning office where we do a pre-application meeting. We talk about what the comprehensive plan policies state. And we look at how community benefit is defined, and we look at the city commission strategic plan and a whole lot of things, what the Affordable Housing Board is doing and what climate protection policies are. I mean, we look at a lot of things, and we talk with that developer, that requester, about what the property can provide. So that will include what's it designated in a sector plan. Well, it's designated for residential, and it's medium-density residential, okay? So we don't expect the community benefit in that instance to be primary jobs. So we're going to look in the realm of housing benefit. And is there floodplain on the property? Are there sensitive lands? Are there anything around those amenities of the property that can provide a benefit? Is it identified as a location for a public facility that we may want to get a team in from the city talking about negotiating some land cost at raw land values versus improved values? I mean, there's really it's very much that kind of process, depending on what property it is, what it's designated in the plan, how big it is, what the developer's desires are around it, perhaps what the demand is, where the need is, and so on and so forth. And so the part of this sentence which talks about which may include offsetting incentives to the requester came out of the testimony and discussion between Planning Commission and parties to make sure that the opportunity for offsetting incentives, and that offsetting word I think is important because it's not intended to put the entire burden on the developer to provide demand, need, and benefit. It was supposed to be, as you read the rest of this policy, which doesn't get a lot of attention, frankly, it talks about partnering with, in collaboration with community partners, with the city, and so forth, to bring together an annexation that, as we build the quilt of Lawrence into the future, is providing us the very best development possible.
So can you tell me, in the context of what the annexation request can support?
That was what, that idea about what is designated in the sector plan, what the property itself, the physical attributes of that property. Again, if we wouldn't try to match up an employment project to something designated for high-density
Okay.
residential.
I have to say something nice. Oh man, it's so hard. So over the years, and before that, as East Lawrence neighborhood president, dealing with all the New Hampshire stuff, I'll have to admit, over the years, that I've never thought that staff hadn't coordinated a compromise that they thought that a majority of the commission would not pass. That's as nice as I can. And this is why Scott is always in the middle, right? He has people from all sides mad at him. But I do feel like he hammers out what he thinks will be acceptable to the commission, and that will change in the future. I have a great deal of confidence in the fluidity of their negotiating skills. So, gosh, I don't know if I can, I've been so mad at Scott for so long, it's hard to sometimes say nice things like this. But I have always felt like that. So while I understand your inclination to really hammer out details, I do feel confident in having attached to the end, including other items as they arise. I have a lot of faith in that I guess over the years has been built up in watching staff. So that's why I'm confident with what we have. I'm never going to say anything nice against Scott.
Well, and just to kind of finish up my thoughts, I do stand by the proposal that I put to you all. I'm tired. I think everybody's tired in regard to this topic, but I do think it's important, and it's not actually adding legalese. It's reducing an appearance of legalese that isn't valid, that doesn't exist. And this chapter is different from the other chapters in many ways, and I've pointed those out as well, particularly in the use of legal language. But my main concern is not to legalize it in a way that doesn't exist. It's to be transparent, honestly, about the reality of this, while also offering priorities that the commission now has an opportunity to outline that can influence this community for decades, without tying the hands of future commissions on paper, but not in reality. And so we're not offering a transparent process if we use language like this, in my opinion. So for me, it's a simplification, it's a reduction of legalese and clarification about what the process is, and an opportunity for us to identify our priorities in a way that does lay out the considerations that the commission has to take into account.
So, Matthew, the changes that you're wanting, or the changes is just an adding a bullet point to the community benefit. Is that my understanding? Is that?
Yes.
That's the change you're asking for, and
That's it. I
That's
just
it.
would like to see inventory as a community benefit.
I don't support that. I mean, look at the double density that we just passed. I think that that's something will actually increase inventory, and then we have the added bonus where the other dwelling has to be affordable housing on top of that. I see us already doing things to better handle, or perhaps make transparent, increasing density in our cities. So even though I hear the word zero lot inventory, that doesn't register as it processes in my head
As a community benefit, you mean?
as being accurate.
Oh. Measurable? Just trying to understand.
Are you
I
saying
think
that that's
that-
not a truthful statistic?
I'm saying that when I hear someone say that we're at 0 lot inventory, when I think of how we just passed this ordinance that allows us to double the density on lots and require them to be affordable housing to boot, I don't really see that as accurate, that it's 0 lot inventory. I think that's one of the better things that we've done in 4.5 years, frankly.
So, Scott, could you talk about zero lot? Is that a reality? I mean,
that
is that a,
subjective?
Well, it changes every year. That's why we try to do the report annually, because plats come on and lots get absorbed through our approximately 150 permits per year. So it changes every year, and we monitor it, and we do not monitor it to the detail of looking at every single lot. That's just not feasible for us. So it's just a barometer. It's just a benchmark. It's something, and we haven't, by the way, determined what's a healthy market for it. Is it a 2-year supply? Is it a 5-year supply? Is it a 10-year supply? So there are some questions around that issue. But again, that's just part of the equation. And it did not drive this policy, by the way. That report has been produced now for 5 to 7 years, and it changes every year. But I publicly stated concern for it because.
Would you agree with the statement that we have a 2.3-year inventory?
Yeah, I think that's what it was
Yeah.
something, that was the
That was the
product of
report.
it. But I don't know how many, how many lots we've created since then, but yeah. Yeah, it is absolutely something we need to pay attention to.
and so if that language, and I know we don't have some support for it, were put in there, so who would determine what that means?
Same body that would determine anything, what anything in here means. I mean, and, Scott points out that this report is produced annually. So if we have a bunch of lots come on, or the double density program we passed has the effect that Leslie, says could deal with this, then next year when the report shows that our lot inventory is significantly higher than it was the year before, well, then it no longer is a demand issue and no longer serves as a community benefit, right? This isn't a pass-go-free card here. This is saying that when demand exceeds supply, that there is a need for lot inventory, and there is a benefit to the community with bringing on additional lot inventory. That's all it's saying.
How do we measure the demand?
You do it with your annual report that shows our lot inventory.
Well, that's inventory, that's not demand.
Correct, but as our lot inventory decreases or diminishes or potentially zeroes out, you obviously hit a point where you have no supply, or you have a limited supply, and the creation of supply is going to help ease the cost of housing. Because when we zero out, or we get to a point where our infill lot availability is so limited, you're going to see the costs of those homes skyrocket. People aren't going to build affordable housing on the last available lot. I mean, that's just basic economics, I believe.
So is there any support for what Commissioner Herbert's talking about?
I would be fine with the addition of that.
So if that language to be added, would there be support for the whole document? No. So it doesn't seem as though we have support for any changes to 3.8, or I shouldn't say don't have majority support for 3.8 changes, from what I'm hearing. Is that correct? The only other change that's being requested is to the community benefits, which is the bullet point you're asking for. And the support for that, Jennifer,
Yeah, I would support that. I think that, regardless of whether we put it in there, it's a community benefit that I think that would be identified and brought to us. I think that there is a real concern about the lack of available lots
Yes.
in the near future. And I mean, it does seem somewhat short-sighted to have problems in here that we know are coming sooner than later that we aren't clearly identifying.
Well, I do see the lot inventory as being an issue, but I go back to it says specifically, but is not limited to, and that the work is going to be, once this is passed through the various bodies that it needs to go through, that's when the work's going to really begin to identify specifically more what a community benefit is. How much detail we need to put into this list on this side point, we could go on. I mean, there's other things that I think that we could list that I would consider a community benefit. So I don't know how much more detail we really need to get this to go. So right now, I am in support of the way it's written. I think that definitely that's an issue, Matthew. And that needs to be identified as we move forward with the document. So. Anything else? Anybody want to add anything to that? You want to take a vote?
So, the motion would be that we adopt on second final reading joint ordinance number 9699, county resolution number whatever, to adopt Plan 2040, a comprehensive plan for unincorporated Douglas County and the city of Lawrence.
And that includes the revision to 2.2 from September 3rd to
Yes,
tonight.
that's the,
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Boley, a second by Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Did you vote?
I did. I
Okay.
said aye.
Okay. 4-1. Passes 4-1. We'll take a quick break, 5 minutes. So we're going to move on to public comment, general public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state your name and address. Speakers should address all comments and questions directly to the commission. Do we have any general public comment on items not related to the agenda?
I'm Megan Stuckey, the Executive Director of the Willow Domestic Violence Center. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you so much for this year's proclamation for Domestic Violence Awareness Month and for your commitment to survivors in our community. Because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I thought this was a good time to discuss some ways the city can help us make real progress in our quest for safety from abuse. The Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence created the Maryland Model Lethality Assessment Program, or what we call in the business LAP, in 2005 as an innovative strategy to prevent domestic violence, homicides, and serious injuries. It provides an easy and effective method for law enforcement and other community professionals such as healthcare providers, clergy members, caseworkers, court personnel, and even bystanders or family members to identify victims of domestic violence who are at the highest risk of being seriously injured or killed by their intimate partners and immediately connect them to local community-based domestic violence service programs like the Willow. The LAP is a multi-pronged intervention that consists of a standardized evidence-based lethality assessment instrument, an accompanying referral protocol that helps the first responders make a differentiated response that is tailored to the unique circumstances of high-danger victims. The LAP was originally designed for law enforcement. When the LAP is used now while it is used by varied allied professionals, the basic protocol is similar for all disciplines. The Lawrence Police Department is an excellent partner to the Willow. We hope that they can institute a standard LAP protocol like so many of our neighboring communities have already done. The Willow believes that our LPD needs and deserves additional staff to effectively do this work. One officer or more that is designated just to DV work would in that position's entirety would be helpful in the numerous follow-ups that are necessary to do a LAP program with efficacy and fidelity. The Willow currently receives under $15,000 a year in city funding to do our work. We hope to add a staff person to our roster who will office at the new police facility and assist in victim services. Lethality assessment and officer training also would go under that position. While it is far from city budget time, I realize that. I suggest that now is an excellent time to begin research and conversation around these important and evidence-based needs. I invite commissioners, city leaders, and candidates for the commission to visit our offices. You can tour our shelter and learn more about what we do to combat the epidemic of domestic violence in our community. Thank you.
Any other general public comment on items not on the current?
Hi, I'm Chris Flowers. I just want to say, like, a couple weeks ago, I attended that climate strike, and I was just thinking, well, maybe the city can just think of small things it can do at least to try to help the climate. And one of the things I was thinking of is we shouldn't keep it so cold in here during the summer. Like, if we just kept a few degrees warmer, I mean, because, I mean, it's t-shirt and short weather out, so I think we should just be keeping it a little bit warmer in here and not using so much energy to keep it so cold. Thank you.
Chris? Any other general public comment?
Before Megan disappears, I actually asked Megan to come and speak about this kind of proposal that they're working on, adding. Megan? I didn't want to interrupt Chris getting up there. I would have brought it up in commission items, but I don't have any details. Come back. I was worried I wasn't going to catch you. So you have this proposal that you want to kind of better deal with domestic violence issues, and you have kind of evidence that proves that a certain percentage of police calls have to do with domestic violence, that this program that you're bringing up will actually help to reduce kind of
Lethality.
those calls.
It won't reduce well, it might reduce the calls. Hopefully it will. The idea is if they handle them on the first or second call with this lethality assessment and the person gets plugged into the Willow and gets the help they need there, the lethality assessment then would go to the court, and that would help in prosecution. So we would hope that there would be a much better and effective, because it's repeat calls is what happens. These
Right.
calls are many, multiple.
So
So
it's
if
more
we do it,
wraparound,
if we
I
do it
guess.
well the first time, we're going to have fewer repeat calls.
Right.
Also, we're going to have lower lethality. So we can ask the first 3 questions on the list basically indicate the high risk of lethality. So if they answer yes to 2 of those 3, or any of those 3 really, we're going to say to them right there on the spot, look, you may not know it, but you are at high risk to be killed by your partner, which is really hard to hear, but also I think people should know what
Right.
they're dealing with. The PD currently does not do the risk assessment because it requires in the protocol that they follow up within 48 hours while the abuser is in jail, because that's what happens if they go to jail.
And man hours to follow
So they
up
just don't
is-
feel like they have the
Right.
staff
Commissioner?
necessary to do that
Commissioner
follow-up
Sullivan?
piece.
I'm sorry, we're not supposed to discuss these items?
No, but I did want to
I'm
see
sorry.
if we could have staff
Well,
work
yeah, we can refer it to
with
staff.
Megan.
Yeah, we can refer it to staff
Yeah,
once we get through
exactly.
with all this.
mean,
I would
it's
love
not-
that.
It's not
Yeah.
something we're going to vote on right now.
Okay.
No, no, no.
I know, but
But I wanted to make sure, first of all, that I understood what she was talking about. And then hopefully the rest of the commission is interested in having staff
Yeah.
work with the
Okay.
Willow.
yeah, I think I understood from her discussion. She did a good job of describing it, so,
Yeah,
Okay.
you're smarter than me, I guess.
okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. I
Thank
would
you.
be happy to do any kind of work I can on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So did we get any other public comment, general public comment? I lost
I
my
didn't
place.
see any.
Okay. All right. So, correct, if you guys could maybe reach out to Megan.
Oh, yeah,
Uh-huh.
we
I
absolutely
figured
will.
you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the regular agenda items. Item number 1, consider providing clarification to the Parks and Recs Advisory Board regarding specific items where their advice would be helpful to the commission.
Mayor, Commissioners, I'm Penny Holler with the city's Parks and Recreation Department. You have before you a request from the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board to provide clarification on the specific items that the commission would find helpful in its preparation for the 2021 budget. A memo from the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board was included in your agenda packet that details these questions from the board. Staff from the Parks and Recreation Department, including Director Derek Rogers, are available to answer any questions you may have. I'd like to first introduce the Chair of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Marilyn Hull, to speak about this request.
Good evening, Mayor Larsen and Commissioners. I'm here tonight with the Vice Chair of the Advisory Board, Bart Littlejohn, and I just wanted to introduce him. Appreciate him being here and being supportive. You have a memo from our advisory board. Penny just summarized it briefly, so I don't really have prepared remarks per se. The advisory board just wants to be as helpful to you guys as possible because as we understand it, our role is to advise you guys. And in the discussions several months ago on the 2020 budget, there was some discussion about the Parks and Recreation Department and whether it had a sustainable budget and whether things needed to happen in terms of revenue additions, costs, reductions, and that sort of thing. And your decision, as you'll remember, was to give the department a year and yourselves a year and city staff a year to decide how to move forward on this. And part of your conversation was that you wanted the Parks and Rec Advisory Board to be involved in advising you on this. So I'm simply here tonight to ask you what questions you would like us to study, and how we can best provide you with advice that will be helpful to you moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So, any questions for Marilyn? I would like to just give a little bit of background from our side, because in your memo you had indicated you had spoke with Commissioner Bowling and myself, and during that conversation, it was with you and Bart, when we were discussing some ideas back and forth, is we did indicate at that time that we're just two commissioners, and we thought it would be a good idea for you to ask for more clarification from everybody. So that's why, that's one of the reasons that we've asked her up here, just to make sure everybody's in agreement as to what we want them to do.
What was the topics that you were wanting clarity on?
They were wanting clarity on.
Yeah,
I should say,
so,
from the
I mean, our
memo.
original understanding of our charge was to figure out how to balance the recreation fund budget. And sort of in the discussions over the course of the budget time, I heard numbers anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 dollars of revenue lacking. And so, the first question was, all right, well, do you guys want us to try to figure out as an advisory board, or to advise you on how to plug that budget gap? When we talked to the two commissioners, their interests were more holistic and less about our advisory board doing budget number crunching, and more about us trying to hone in on the public's priorities for the Parks and Recreation Department. And, those are two sort of very different tasks. And we know that there were a couple of things that were particularly contentious in the conversations this year. One was instituting fees for entering recreation centers, and the other was the phase closure of the community building. So there's, we're simply seeking from you some direction on what are the specific questions that you'd like us to spend some time studying, so that the advice that we give you is actually useful to you. Did that help, Commissioner Soden?
Yeah, over the years, I've had, of course, a lot of frustration with Parks and Rec and the budgeting. So I do feel like, first of all, a really functional advisory board is really important, and it seemed like for a long time we didn't really have that. So the idea that you guys are having meetings, you're actually digging in to budget numbers and really having conversations about things is really great. I think that's a really good start. I think that really what you're talking about, that you're looking for ideas in how to apparently solve the sustainability of the rec fund, those are valid to ask us. And also what I'm hearing from their side, that they want to know about the public priorities and perhaps focus on those. I mean, can you do both?
I mean, possibly. Finding out the public's priorities for Parks and Rec is, that's a big task. There is a master plan that I think is about 2 or 3 years old that attempts to outline that in detail. So part of the clarification would be, are you asking us to kind of review the master plan with a different lens, or consider updates to the master plan? That's sort of one set of tasks versus a rather limited set of tasks. Okay, we have one fund within the Parks and Recreation budget that seems to have a problem. How do we fix this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a more defined task that could probably, it's going to be hard for us to study, but that's very doable. Going out to the public and sort of trying to capture a more current view of the priorities of the department, that's a significant task, and we're very willing to do that. So that's part of the reason we're asking for clarity of, what do you want us to do?
Yeah, the master plan, I thought, was a really good document for kind of working into the future. I remember specifically, I should have dug it up today when I was home very briefly, but the matrix and determining, what our community's needs versus wants, and then you have, your different quadrants. But I think those kind of things, it's not so much that I'm looking for you all to do kind of your own research and go out and do things. To me, what seemed to be lacking was kind of public oversight of Parks and Rec. Of course, the big example when we were first elected was the ice skating rink, where, you hear every summer about how we can't afford lifeguards, we can't do this, we can't do that, we have to close down the pool in the summer, blah, blah, blah. This is obviously anecdotal, what I'm saying. But on one hand, you feel like you get that kind of messaging from Parks and Rec. And then on the other hand, it's like, oh, we're going to have this fake ice skating rinks next to the library, and we're going to purchase all of this equipment next to it, even though it doesn't really have anything to do with our master plan or anything. It's just, there seemed to be this real disconnect between what Parks and Rec was doing. And of course, Sports Pavilion was a big one as well, Rock Chalk Park. So to me, having just public oversight of making sure that they're staying on point, on mission in regards to this master plan, while helping them, with these kind of budget crunching kind of things and determining what you feel perhaps might be public priority wise and how to kind of fill that budget hole. Should we do this versus that? Well, what do you as a representative of the public think would be a good scenario? Of course, any kind of ideas that you have are going to come to us. So, and we'll be talking about those.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I feel like you should be doing.
I guess I'm a little concerned at the words public oversight, because this is an advisory board, and, we don't need, it's kind of our job to do the public oversight, and they can certainly provide advice. I guess I'm really interested in how, we can, leverage the expertise of staff and also the expertise of the advisory board in a united effort to, address these concerns over the next year. I don't want to see a huge gap between the advisory board and staff. I think, maybe we could have a comment from our manager on what you might recommend or what you might see here.
Well, thank you. I think creating a crystal clear vision of what the community expectations are is something that it's nice to have advisory citizens to help do and work with you on. Programming it and trying to figure out exactly how that's going to work from a budgetary standpoint, I think we're better at that. That's what we can bring to the table, and then work collaboratively to say what priorities match up with the resources that we have. There's still going to be hard questions to answer that really will fall in your lap eventually with the next budget, but we want to be creative in how do we solve those problems and offer those suggestions. But I think on what the priorities are and what kind of programming our community wants, that's a great thing for volunteer citizens to help advise you and advise us on, so we can collaborate.
Okay. And then thought.
My only comment, I guess, was a little, some of these have been very broad
Yeah.
philosophically, and I guess I missed the boat on that. I was shooting more for specifics. One specific I would love to see the advisory board bring back in terms of evidence was actually similar to something Derek had approached us with when we were talking about, I think it was raising pool fees. In Lawrence, a lot of people like myself grow up here and live here our whole lives, and that's great, but the problem is then you kind of, this is the only way you've ever known it. And Derek presented to us a chart that showed, pool fees at every community that surrounds us, and I think that the thesis he was getting at was we're basically charging nothing compared to everyone around us. And that sort of information I find particularly helpful. Just that notion of looking outside of Lawrence at, how is the rest of the world doing this? Parks and Recs departments are not, we're not isolated here. Virtually every community has one, and so just kind of looking at how similar cities operate. Certainly, there are cities out there that have budgets that are self-sustaining. How do they do that? Those communities that don't have them, how do they do it? Things of that nature. That's a little more specific than the larger philosophical question, but that's I guess how my brain operates. I just want to know how other communities do it.
I appreciate that you kind of bring that to the table, because I looked at it as looking at the purpose of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, which unfortunately for you all is incredibly broad, or maybe fortunately, but it's to advise the governing body of the city of Lawrence, Kansas regarding parks and recreation issues affecting programs and services and facilities of the city's Parks and Rec Department. So yes, all of the things. And so one thing that I think that we also need to consider is, where does Derek's job description and authority and responsibility lie in making these decisions? And to what extent does that as an advisory board advise and offer information versus direct, or even if Derek is required to make a really difficult decision that is not publicly favorable, how then are we setting him up for failure?
Well, I mean, I think this advisory board is advising us. It's not advising Derek.
Right, but if they come up with a recommendation that's counter to something that, I want to make sure that, one, we're not stepping on his authority through the advice that we're receiving, and two, that we're not setting ourselves or him up for failure. That's not to say that we don't make difficult decisions, even if the advice is counter to that. But I also don't want to say, figure out how we never, ever have to raise fees and tell us. And the reality is the budget won't allow for that. And so that very difficult decision has to lie with the recommendation that Derek brings forward.
Well, I guess I go back to what Craig was talking about. You could say it again more eloquently than I could restate it, but it's the policies and the desires of the community. Is that?
Yeah, let's let everybody do what they're best at. I mean, we're going to be good on technical programming. We also, I think, have a sense of what, from a staff perspective, how to make our residents happy in the recreation space. Nobody likes fees, so that's an easy decision. Do you like fees? No, we don't like fees, but it may be a necessary solution to a problem to help us deliver services. So there'll be I think there's some policy questions that we can throw. We will form policy questions that we don't have an answer to, that are hard, and ask these citizens to give us some guidance on those priorities, and give evidence and back it up with data, which we like data. But and then that eventually will hopefully come to a budget that I recommend to you next year that'll be informed by citizen input, and there you'll receive their benefit.
I would like to just go back to our meeting where we asked the Parks and Rec Board to take over this task, and I had it printed out, but I finally found it here online on June 4th. And the action was to direct Parks and Rec Advisory Board to review and make recommendations on the user fees proposed by the Director of Parks and Recreation, including but not limited to the fee structure, the need for the fee, alternate options for closing the funding gap, impact on low-income residents in the Community Health Equity Plan, and obtain community feedback and direct the city manager to facilitate the needs of the advisory board in obtaining information from staff. So that was our original request to the Parks and Rec Board, which I still feel a need to hear some of this, especially the community input on the fee structures and how it meets with our equity plan and so forth. So.
Well, we've taken some community input on it at our meetings, as this was in the headlines. We had a number of members of the public come, and I guess my preliminary answer to you is there was significant equity concerns, and I think I made a presentation to you all to that effect. So then it's sort of like, all right, well, where do we go from here? I appreciate Commissioner Ananda how you phrased this, because we don't want to be in the position of opposing something that staff is recommending all the time. I mean, that might occasionally happen, but the goal is for us to sort of all be on the same team and trying to work toward the same best solutions. So I'm not sure whether what I've heard so far tonight is entirely definitive. We have started working on this question of the recreation fund and, how to make up the amount of money that needs to be made up there. And we can continue on that path. These bigger questions about, what the community wants, or has that changed since the master plan or whatever, that's sort of a different discussion. So just trying to get some clarity about really which of those directions do you want us to take?
I didn't think the master plan was that old. Is it that old?
Couple years, 3 years, 2 years. Mm-hmm.
Lisa, may I scoot over and look at your screen so I can look at that ask? I don't want to invade your space.
I was. There it is, here it is. That's what we had asked.
I guess to me, the master plan did have some objectives and timelines. Is that something that you think that the advisory board might be of help to the department at all?
I don't understand your question, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I understand how I'm asking it either. I realized after I said it. I'm trying to think of how to rephrase it. We have a master plan. It does have objectives and timelines in it. So conceivably, Parks and Rec is following the master plan, but are they? Is that something that you feel like you could give input on if Parks and Rec has strayed far from the master plan? Do you feel that's an appropriate oversight kind of function?
Go ahead, Derek.
Derek Rogers, Director of Parks Recreation. Commissioner Sutton, I like your comments on the master plan. We've done quite a bit with the master plan. I wasn't here when it started. I think it started sometime in 2016, took 9-10 months to complete, and it was completed around February of 2017. So in the 2.5, almost 3 years that we've been working on the master plan, I would say we're about 30% complete with the objectives. We have done quite a bit in the master plan. One of the things that we're reviewing right now as a department is considering we've got some great assets in the master plan. We've updated some of them, but we're getting to those tough decisions in the master plan, and I think it's worth getting the public input, which will support the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, our department, and the community on are we heading in the right direction. And I think it's time for us to take a look at doing the second half of this. And I'd like to say it would be 10 years from now we'd be updating the master plan. I think the last one went from 2000 to 2016, 2017. So I think that's a good thing that we've been moving forward with it. But I think it's worth getting a new set of eyes on it, getting the public engaged again.
One aspect that we've learned a little bit about since that was published is the Douglas County Health Department equity report. And I'm very much interested in, taking information from, the equity concepts and say, how are we, dealing with equity as we go forward with the master plan? And I would like to say that I'm less concerned about having the Parks and Rec Advisory Board worry about trying to balance the rec fund budget. I mean, I don't, I think staff can be working on that. And, you know, frankly, it's going to be the city manager's recommended budget that comes out. It's not going to be the advisory committees. So I would prefer that you focus more on the areas of how are we doing on the master plan, do we need to make changes, and how do we incorporate equity, than worrying about balancing a fund. That's for me.
And I think if I recall, our original intention of this body was never to ask them to balance the fund, but rather to look at what our city staff's attempts to balance the fund are doing to our community. In other words, what effect is raising pool fees having on the community members' ability to attend the pool? I still think that's a valuable role the advisory board plays, is not necessarily proposing policy, but rather looking at the actual impact of policy upon the community. I mean, that's what I think an advisory board does.
So I wonder if it's how to equitably and responsibly impose those fees if they become a necessity through the budget, to have the least impact on the community, using our consistent, those difficult decisions that are coming up in the master plan that are really easy to not make for as long as possible. How do we do that as well as we can?
I'm just going to go back to the original ask back in May or June. And so are we saying we don't want them to look at this, what this original ask was, which is the fee structure itself, the need for a fee, options to closing the funding gap, income? Do we want them to look at the impact on low-income residents in the community health equity plan? Get community feedback? Do we still want them to do that?
Well, I mean, I think that ask was in the context of the budget talks we were doing for the 2020 budget. I think that we've moved through that. We have new management. You know, we have an opportunity to reset that expectation from that to what are we asking now? And I think there are elements of that that are incorporated in what we're talking about now. But I would hate to, you know, say this is the ask that we have for now and going forward.
Right.
And that ask only pertained to a part of the picture. There were a number of revenue increases and cost reductions proposed. And that original restriction, or that original instruction really pertained to the rec fees only.
Right. To the proposed fees that they were.
That's right.
Yes. Okay, so we just need to change what we were wanting from before. So how do we want to do that? Because I'm still interested in getting community feedback on this whole thing, and I know you've had some, but are we going to have a community meeting saying we're going to have a meeting, come talk about this, or?
Yeah, I mean, those are all things we can do, Mayor Larsen, if that's what would be the most helpful to you, you all collectively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that?
I think Craig has something to say over here.
Well, maybe a place where they can productively assist. If we do get into fees, there are policies that kind of guide how your fees are impacting a community. So they could be special population impact, income impact, you know, age. If there's not a policy that's kind of guiding those things, I just asked if we had one. And if there isn't one there, that could be the area where they could help guide us. We're the places where we want to reduce the impact of fees, yet still generate revenue that are going to help support programs. And likewise, what kinds of programs are we offering? You know, if we have to make reductions in services and our costs, maybe some of those programs, we want to be careful, the ones that we reduce are going to affect negatively something that's a higher priority, such as health impacts or some of those things. So we could still be in the policy realm, and they can help guide that and get public input, I think, and give us really useful information preparing for the budget next year.
Okay. Is that clarity?
That's helpful. Or do you want to add anything?
Not much.
Littlejohn, Vice Chair of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I just wanted to echo what Marilyn said before. I think one of the reasons we're coming to you is that it turned out to be a pretty heavy lift, what you were asking us, both on the budgetary side and also to get like feedback from the community. And us being not in a managerial role, an advisory board volunteers, that was a little bit impressive. So we decided that a little bit more clarity was needed so that we could better direct our efforts so that we can help you, because that's our job. So I think that the direction that all of the talks are going right now is very helpful, because that's that's ironing out a lot of things, and so that we can kind of pinpoint the issues and provide solutions. So.
Okay. Does that sound, is that enough for you, Marilyn, to get going on?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
You guys.
Do we need any motions or
Yeah,
anything?
do we need?
What's that?
Priority-based budgeting, wait till we
Wait till-
get into that. I bring that up because, or I should say, I always bring the pool up, because to me, that is a program that I'm happy to heavily subsidize by the city, and so my expectation of recovering costs through fees is very low. While for golf, it's off the charts. I feel like it should all be recovered, from fees. So, there's a balance to what you talk about, and I guess that's why we can't really give any kind of concrete specifics at what you're talking about, because we have these policies, but then once you range them with funding, then yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, I guess you might say, where we put our money where our mouth is. So I bring up priority-based budgeting because then those are actual calculations that we can have. I don't know if you remember, Casey, but we talked about how if you have that matrix I was talking about, you could say, well, we want to recover pool costs or subsidize them by 75%. Those are actual calculations that we can make that would actually help define fees, and that would be something you might not never actually have to deal with, because it would then be a calculation within priority-based budgeting. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, what I'm saying.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
We realize it's a part of it, but it's, we just wanted a little bit more of a focus, just so, because a year is not a long time to go ahead and provide this information. So if we're kind of scattered and going in a couple different areas, it's going to dilute the efforts that we're going to go ahead and provide you.
Yeah, and I don't want to burn y'all out
Yeah,
right
so-
off the bat either.
But yeah, that was just mainly most of it. So, but I readily, I understand where you're coming from, the priority-based budget.
Okay.
Be a big one.
All right.
I did want to just add, just make sure I understand, Sherry, we're doing this correctly, because when we did this back in June, we actually voted on it in a 5-0 vote that this was the direction we were going to give them. Do we need to back?
You wanted to very specifically direct staff to work with them and provide information and be open to information.
So do we need
There
to
was a motion.
have another
I don't-
vote?
I don't feel like we need a vote, but I'll defer to the city manager on that to.
Yeah, I think I have an idea of what we
Okay.
can do to bring the best out of them and get great advice to help prepare for the budget
Okay.
and make the decisions a little bit clearer.
Okay, I just didn't want somebody down the road to say, you told them to do this, and they didn't know it, and we didn't vote on it again. Okay.
We need to do public comment.
So did I understand that there's going to be some follow-up, Craig?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is we'll work with our team and hopefully bring back a series of kind of policy questions that will help define how fees, if they're charged, how those should be structured, and then what some of the impacts are, and do the same thing with program mix, because, how costly a program is to the priority-based budgeting, how costly that is all goes into it. We'll add into elasticity of pricing and how much you'll actually drop off, and market demand, some of those other things, market factors.
That's awesome.
It'll keep you busy.
Oh, no, we fully anticipate that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay, we need to do public comment, though, before,
Yeah.
so don't leave yet, in case we have questions.
I was just wondering do we have accurate, numbers of how many people are using, parks? Because we do the thing where we keep track of how many people are, using streets, but are we, I work with a lot of skaters, and do we know how many people are using the skateboarding parks as opposed to, let's say, playing tennis? And also, for like the buildings and stuff where we might charge fees, do we have accurate numbers of how many people are using those buildings so we know how much we should be charging fees to recoup the cost? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? All right, I don't think we have we don't need to vote, so we're good to go. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Marilyn Bart. Okay, we've changed the agenda order, so now we're going to move on to commission items, future agenda items to add. Anybody have anything? How about future work session items to add?
I was contacted by the business manager for the Teamsters recently, and they're interested in our resolution on employment. It's I can't remember the resolution number, but, you know, that might be a good idea to have a work session on that if people want to. Because I think there is some interest in organizing some of the bargaining unit members and city staff. So,
Is there any interest in having a work session on that?
Yeah.
Jennifer?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Was this a situation where maybe it'd be better just to work with the city manager on this, or? Got any thoughts, Craig?
Yeah, we also had a meeting recently, and if they're looking for modification of our resolution, that would obviously take commission action, and it may warrant some discussion in advance of formal action.
Right.
If that's the case, then we would schedule that.
So is that, would we want to just have that after you've had some of those discussions with them? That might be better.
Yeah, to clarify what they're looking for.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Does that
So-
work for you?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay with that?
I think that would
Okay,
work well.
thank you. That'd be good. Other future work items or work session items to add? I had one, that's right. In our November, since it's right after the election, our November work session, I would really like to get a summary of where we're at with our strategic plan. I would like to see details of what we've accomplished based on each initiative that we've done and how far we got in it, basically. I would really love to hear that.
On one hand, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to know what we've accomplished in 4 years. On the other hand, I'm always thinking of, is this better than the new commission? But yeah, I think I do want to hear what we've accomplished in 4 years as the last night.
Kind of the last work session before we change over. Is everybody else okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. Other commission items. I have one. I was contacted by a family about streetlights, and so I didn't know the answer to this question, and they've had problems getting a streetlight fixed in their neighborhood, and they were confused as to who actually is responsible. So they've gone onto Westar website, and they can't get any traction from them to get it fixed. So how do we know if it's a city versus a Westar light?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mayor, and one we get frequently from our residents. The city does own many of the streetlights. Westar owns the vast majority of them. So just depending on which streetlight it is, we would figure that out based on our asset inventory. If it is a Westar-owned streetlight, the city is actually that customer. As you probably recall through the budget process, we budget a substantial amount for the cost of streetlight service. So any residents who have a request related to a streetlight or a request for installation of a new streetlight should just contact the city, and they can do that through the main number to the Municipal Services Department. If you don't remember that number off the top of your head, just have them contact us in the manager's office, and we'll get them where they need to go.
Then you could determine, or you would work through Westar to make sure it got fixed or whatever? Is that
Yeah,
it?
yeah, we would submit a work request. And we do have some development guidelines for where streetlights would be placed. So if it's a request for a new streetlight, we would just review that based on our own guidelines. But yeah, if it's just a simple service request, we would submit that as a work request, and Westar would follow up on it.
All right, okay, thank you.
What about shields that direct the light
Same,
down?
yeah,
Okay.
same process.
Any other miscellaneous commission items?
Yeah, I got a couple of anniversaries. We've got the German delegation coming in from our sister city, Eutin, and you know, it's been 30 years, and it's been a wonderful project over that time, and I recall fondly the first time that they came. I was actually involved in Friends of Eutin back 30 years ago as we were trying to get the sister city relationship established. And so it's going to be great to have our friends come back and say congratulations, and we can congratulate them on a wonderful partnership. And, you know, as I think of those times, I also am reminded that it's also 30 years since the passing of our city manager, Buford Watson. Those two events were very closely aligned, and I believe the KU Public Administration School probably has, or ICMA has a Buford Watson Award, don't they? So he is remembered. Pardon? They both. So he is remembered, and I remember him as well. So anyway, just a couple of, you know, walks down memory lane for me, and you know, it's they're both significant. So thanks.
No other items? Okay, the city manager's report.
Again, I won't go through all the things that are in there. I would like to highlight the city receiving for the 16th time the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. And, you know, okay, 16 times, yeah, we did it again. I just really want to highlight that is not, that's not something everybody gets, not every city gets, and it is pretty rigid and stringent criteria to receive that. And so the work that goes in there benefits the community in ways that are sometimes unseen and a little bit boring, but it's really important information, and the way it's presented is subjected to rigors of outside eyes, and I think there's always value in that.
Thank you. Any questions on the city manager's report?
No, but I thought it was really cool, the human resources kiosks
Oh, yeah.
that exist. Those are really great, and I'm glad to hear the work that they're doing.
Okay. Any public comment on the city manager's report? No. All right. Calendar items. Anything to add?
There is the OITeen delegation thing. I don't know if any other commissioners are going, but I will be there.
I'll be going Friday night, and as well as Monday night,
Yeah,
2 of them.
I'll be going.
Okay. Any other meetings we need to add? Okay. So we'll move on to item 2 on our regular agenda, which is consider motion to recess into executive session.
I move we recess into executive session for approximately 45 minutes to discuss pending litigation and privileged legal communications from the city's attorneys regarding employment law pursuant to KSA 754319B2. The justification for the executive session is to keep attorney-client privilege matters confidential at this time. At the end of the executive session, the city commission will resume its regular meeting in the commission room.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Ananda, second by Commissioner Soden. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We're in executive session. Okay, we have nothing to report. So, on to adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Herbert, a second by Commissioner Boley. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Adios.